I have the pleasure, as I have many times on many continents, I think 4 continents at this point, Robert, to introduce our good friend Rob Swan. Rob is the first, and at this point I think only person, as he would say, stupid enough to walk to both poles. Now let me be clear here. When I mean that he walked to both poles, it means he got off of a boat on the edge of Antarctica. Anybody else been to Antarctica? On the edge of he got out of a boat with a backpack on and he walked 683 miles, something like that. He'll tell us about it, to the South Pole. And then he said, well, that's not good enough. Let's go to the North Pole too. Now, this is one of the most idiotic things I've ever heard, but Rob is one of the only people I know who is at both at once, idiotic and profound and meaningful. And this is all with a sense of dramatic and important purpose, which he will share. And so much so idiotic that he decided it would be a great idea to bring his son, Barney, on the trip with him earlier this year. And they again returned, this time together, to the South Pole. With that, Rob and Barney Swan.
Well, thank you very much, Rob. I'm going to tell you a story very, very quickly about limitless horizons. Also a story about what is truly possible to achieve together. Now, where did this begin? This began for me at the age of 11 when I saw a film about the Antarctic, and I said, I'm going to do it. And somehow we did it. I never expected that exactly 50 years on that I would stand at the South Pole with my son Barney, and the purpose of me standing here is actually to introduce him later. But first, let's imagine walking across a continent twice the size of Australia without any iPhone X, no communications, no backup, no GPS. Your destination is one building about the size of this stage, the South Pole Station. You either get there or you don't come back. This happened 30 years ago, and if we fell into a crevasse on the way to the South Pole, we were not coming home. I know trust has been an important word used today, but in our business, without full trust, because you can't half trust people, without full trust, you will not come home. In this photograph, we're in an area the size of the United States of America, and we're the only people there. Think of that. And beneath our feet, 16,000 feet of solid ice. 90% of all the world's ice is in Antarctica. 70% of the world's fresh water, we're standing on it. And trust me, ladies and gentlemen, when I say this is one of the most dangerous threats to our survival here on Earth. Why? Because if we melt it, we're going to swim, or I might say continue to melt it, we're going to swim. And after 70 days, 69 pounds lighter on the body, this was hard work, we reached the South Geographic Pole. 3 people had achieved what everybody said could not be done. We'd done it, the longest unassisted march ever made anywhere on Earth in history. And something happened to me walking to the South Pole that brought me here today. My eyes changed colour through damage in 70 days. Our faces peeled away, ripped away off our faces. We didn't know why. But when we got home, we were told by NASA that we'd walked, yes, under the hole in the ozone layer the year it was discovered. In fact, the month it was discovered. Fabulous. Ultraviolet rays come down, hit the ice, bounce back, ripped us to pieces. And this started me to think that maybe our survival here on the planet wasn't somebody else's problem. May I had a part to play in it. And now, as Rob kindly said, he's very polite, that we would head to the North Pole. No one in history had walked to both, so I thought, well, why not? And to walk to the North Pole, you walk from ice on land 700 miles into the middle of a frozen ocean. So every step you take is away from the safety of land. And so the walk to the North Pole is desperately hard physically. 8 of us from 7 nations would live in a stinking tent as we gradually went away from the safety of land. Here's me coming in, washing naked at, translated into American, minus 78 degrees Fahrenheit. And the gentleman in the audience will notice there is absolutely nothing hanging down in the central area of the photograph. It's fairly obvious why. We're now 642 miles from land, from safety. And the only thing that we hadn't planned for 28 years ago now happened. The entire ice pack melted beneath our feet. This photograph was taken in the month of April. It's supposed to look like this in August, and we hadn't planned for this. And do remember, we are British-led. We don't have a CNN camera crew following us. There's no Russian submarine there just in case we get cold. And basically, we're dead. In 20 hours of trying to go north, we're drifting south. And this was the moment I realized, quite sadly, what I was, which is not very much. I'm not an explorer, I'm not an environmentalist, and I'm too stupid to be a scientist. But do you know something? I'm really good at staying alive. I'm a damn good survivor, and a survivor does not look at this and do nothing about it. A survivor survives by dealing with threats. And we came through this after a monstrous battle. I have no time to tell you how hard it was, but we reached there. We stood at 90 North. The job was done. We'd done it, not me. And we went back home and thought I'd go and see my mum, but no. Jacques Cousteau, our great patron, called me in and he gave me a 50-year mission. I thought it might give me a bit of a break, but no, he gave me, 27 years ago, a 50-year mission to preserve Antarctica. In the year 2041, 23 years from now, the treaty that preserves all of us, one place on Earth that we've yet to destroy, could come up for review. It could be changed, it could be altered. And I think we should have the sense to leave one place alone on Earth. And one way of making that happen is to involve lots of people by taking them to Antarctica, which we've done, young leaders, old leaders like me, from all over the world down to Antarctica. And I'm very proud of this. When did you last hear good news from the Middle East? Well, we try. You know, one of the reasons I think I'm still standing here alive is I've always tried to be the positive person around the table. It's sometimes difficult. It's easier to complain. It's easier to criticize. But I've never met anybody yet inspired by negative. Anybody here? Not yet. And I'm very proud to say that we've involved over 70 great women from the Middle East, often coming from countries who've never sent anybody to Antarctica. And they've gone back with a great story to actually inspire people. I spent over 4 years of my life recently on a bicycle going around India. Why? Because there's 725 million young people in India, 1.4 billion people in total. And if we don't get it right in India, it doesn't matter what we do here. And India is such an important country. China is such an important country, and if we forget to understand this, we're going nowhere because they are going to dominate our world. They nearly all are already. So it's important we work with India, China. What we see in Antarctica is frightening. I go there every year. I see more ice breaking off every year. But on the good side of life, let's test you. How many people here know there's a hole in the ozone layer? We all do. How many people here honestly know that it's fixing itself? Not many. Why? Because it's good news. That's why you don't know. It is fixing itself. NASA told us last year we should be in the good news business. Now, I was thinking, crikey, that is a map of Antarctica, although we wouldn't believe it quite, but looks quite white. A map of Antarctica. Anyhow, I was thinking about having a holiday, actually, and I was rung up by NASA and asked to come in. And NASA told, and I made a fundamentally stupid mistake. I've made a lot, but this was one of my best. I asked Barney, my son, who you'll meet in a minute, to come and join me at the NASA meeting. And what they told me was that Antarctica was disintegrating much faster than even the most pessimistic people had thought. We'd all remembered, and those people who at my age will understand, 15 years ago, the Larsen B ice shelf broke off. It's 15 years. And last year, the Larsen C ice shelf broke off. These things are happening, and NASA was recording it. And they said, Rob, why is no one taking this seriously? And I rather rudely said, probably because you're being boring. And Barney sort of kicked me under the table and said, Dad, let's get out of here before you say the wrong thing again. And we left the building, and I thought, yeah, I'll do a bit more recycling, help preserve Antarctica. But if we don't get our act together, Antarctica's a massive force. And we will have problems in New York, we'll have problems in Shanghai, and already this family who I know in the Maldives already have had to move their house. That's not, in my view, very fair. And Barney came up with an idea, and I felt very strongly that I should listen to him. I'm a very different character, as you'll see, to my son. But I think one of the reasons that we've managed to do what we've done is we've always stayed listening to each other. It's really important. And he came up with this idea of the Climate Force Challenge, which I thought sounded great. It was going to involve young people, but then Barney said, but Dad, you've got to do more walking. And I thought, why? And I looked at the map and thought, we'd done the blue line, and actually if we do that green line, I will have crossed the whole of Antarctica on foot. It began to interest me. But then Barney made it more complicated by saying, Dad, we're going to make the first expedition ever in history only to survive on renewable energy walking to the pole. I thought, okay, let's try it. So working with NASA, and I think Declan's here somewhere. Declan Flanagan somewhere? Declan? Yes, dear boy. Who I met at Kin Twin, and met Declan. He's up there. He's from Ireland. And I said, would you like to come and help us test this equipment? He came to the Antarctic, and he did that with us. And at the beginning of this journey, I was really excited. But what lay ahead would be the worst experience of my life so far. May I introduce Barney, my son?
And I can assure you the value statement and 2 years' worth of logistics very, very quickly goes out of the window when you're left in a place that, like Dad says, has unlimited horizons, 360 degrees around you, and no off switch for the sun, and minus 45 winds. That vision statement goes out of the window when you're told to march 9 hours a day in those conditions. And very quickly, about a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in, became pretty apparent that despite my father being the first person to walk to the North and South Pole, that it was between his hips and not being able to recover as quickly as the rest of the team, two of us, aside from me, Carl and Martin, a Norwegian and a Welshman. He just couldn't recover as quickly as us. And we only had a limited amount of food. We had to make the mission happen. And it was pretty much the hardest decision I've seen my father had to make to leave his son halfway on a 600-mile journey, 600 nautical mile journey, and know what lay ahead for me. He had done that journey. He knew that we were heading up the glacier to up to 14,000 feet. And when he left, it was a silence that I will never forget. Antarctica will beat you down with its silence to begin with, but having that force that you just heard for 11 minutes suddenly disappear, it was incredibly challenging to keep that momentum going. And sorry to having to show you these images, but this isn't Bear Grylls or some sort of joke. I mean, when my feet started getting frostbite after day 40, day 45, and I'm looking down in the mornings and straight up cutting bits off my feet to stop it getting infected, what is your mission? Why are you doing this? What is your momentum to put your feet back into a boot that is literally got ice in the bottom of it and to march another 9 hours for another 2 weeks? Then the mission statement came back into my head. Day one, when Dad was happy, that was just like fear. 45 days in, feet falling off, chafe in my legs that is literally bleeding, like going through loops, and it's like a meditation retreat you can't get away from, like loops and all your fears and all of these things just right up in your face. And I had one moment, day 45 specifically, and I'm looking down at my feet, and I'm feeling pretty sorry for myself. And I do have an eject button, unlike my father, who 30 years ago would have just been left for dead or died. I mean, there was no eject button back then. They didn't have a sat phone, and I did. And I was thinking, is this an option right now to lose my toe? Is this worth losing my toe? And in that moment of ultimate suffering, I've never suffered as badly as I had on that day. I remembered I was there by choice, rather. I was there by choice. I put myself in that situation by choice. And there's so many people in our world who are in their condition by circumstance, refugees, people living in extreme poverty, whatever circumstance you want to call it. They've been thrown into that. I was in there by choice. And we are in our businesses. We are running our foundations. We are running our families by choice. And I think it's always important to remind ourselves with that when we get frustrated or we start to second guess ourselves. We're here by choice. You can divorce your wife, you can leave your children, you can forget the business, but we don't. We're here by choice. And remember that momentum and the power of that choice. And these things called parhelions definitely gave me a little hope that final week coming in to the South Pole, and it was really something out of the dream. After not seeing anyone out there for 2 months, suddenly there was this little dot coming from the horizon, and there was only one option. It was my mad father to come out and greet us, and a hugely emotional moment, giving that man a hug. He didn't let go for a quick second. And Scott, at the turn of the century, who inspired my father in the 80s, and then bam, 2018, 2 years worth of logistics, 2 months of completely pointless walking to a little shiny spot at the bottom of the world, but we did it. And we proved that we could do it and power ourselves 100% off renewable energy, and we were hugely proud to celebrate that together. But also a huge anticlimax to then be thrown out of that situation where your horizons are totally limitless. You're in nature's womb, effectively, even though it is pretty chilly. And then to be thrown back into the World Economic Forum, London. I remember sitting on the London Underground coming back on my way to Davos and just looking at everyone on their screen, everyone with headphones in, just totally absorbed in these boxes. And it felt like George Orwell, like, what are we doing? Like, where are we? Like, hugely disruptive to come back into what we're doing. But thankfully, I had a momentum and a goal and a passion to actually do something and channel that frustration and that guilt that I was just as much a part of that problem. I flew on planes, I got in Airbnbs, I occasionally had a coconut water that, yes, it was a can, and I have electricity bills, and yes, I'm a consumer, but I am a citizen as well. I'm not just a consumer, I'm a citizen. I have power and I have opportunity, and I can actually do something about it. So bam, Climate Force Challenge. That's my 7-year campaign to mobilize a reduction of 360 million tons of CO2. Even though our dear friend said methane is 8% worse than CO2. CO2, in my eyes, is the elephant in the room right now. And to give you a little bit more of a tangible idea on CO2, this is actually what CO2 looks like in a concentrated form. A gentleman in Iceland, part of the direct air capture facility out there, gave me this. And I'm just trying to make the idea of reducing and offsetting and holding accountability for this more tangible. I love this. CO2 is obviously a gas, but this is tangible. And I'm going to mention some technology a little later that actually is making that into fuels, plastics, all kinds of things. But regardless, CO2, I had this passion to do something that was tangible, that could involve business, it could involve education, And even though that slide's looking a little funky, maybe it's looking funky up there, but we're going to do that through integrating small solutions, restoring directly through big solutions, and connecting people directly to projects that are making a difference. And really making sure that whether it be a family or a big business, that there's an application, there's a device that can actually feel people like they're part of that seven-year campaign. They're part of a momentum that's a little bit more fleeting than just like doing that next flick on your iPhone and you're down to the next thing to do, the next thing to read, the next thing to be concerned about. I'm trying to create something that is embedded and that people can feel like they have an impact towards that. And hopefully that will create a momentum. Some examples of these solutions: planting trees, whether it be millions of them through a reforestation project or just getting some more in your office and your house. Really considering how you eat. I'm not saying become vegan tomorrow, even though that would be great, but maybe just consider having one day a week where you don't have meat, or instead of 4 meat meals a day, maybe just bring it down to 2. And not trying to push anything on anyone, but I'm just trying to open those opportunities and how much impact that really does create. Coming back to the CO2, this technology fascinates me. I'm really pushing, and a big part of this is a direct air capture facility that's literally dragging CO2 directly out of the air. It's not like carbon capture and storage. This is a standalone infrastructure, and the world really, it really is limitless. I mean, being able to push that into making fuels and plastics and brick and mortar for building. I mean, we could create a whole circular economy in 30 years from the junk that we put out into the air, and personally, that really excites me. Making sure that data centers and how we're getting things for cloud service and blockchain, making sure that that is as sustainable as possible, because right now data centers are really not doing a good job being sustainable. Even Google is leading the way trying to change that, but there's a long way to go. We're working with some great people in Iceland who are achieving that. And from a travel perspective, I go to Asia often, and I get frustrated when I forget my personal filtration bottle, because you don't trust the water over there. And thankfully we can go fill up our water bottles here if you have it, but in Asia that's not an option. So just offering very simple solutions like that can reduce dramatically. I have my virtual reality headset here. I've got 4 of them if you want to come check out. I've created a experience of us skiing to the South Pole and coming back, and why I am embarking on this mission. So if you're down, come check it out. It's 5 minutes. And as a social engineering tool and a way to show people your portfolio, VR is exceptionally powerful. So I'd highly recommend getting involved with that. June next year, we're heading to the Arctic for 2 weeks, scaling these solutions, working with 70 industry leaders from around the world. If you'd like to come and join on that, please come and talk to us, get to see some polar bears, get to cause some trouble with some amazing people out there on a 100% net positive expedition. And coming full circle to my dear papa, none of this would have been possible without his insanity that it took to make those hardy expeditions back in the day happen. But I've really tried to live by his words here, and I am taking this responsibility to do something today, not tomorrow, today. And that's our story. And I think Father has one more quick thing to say before we call it a wrap-up.
Thanks very much, Barney. You take that. Yeah, I just have to say quickly 2 things. One is I'm extremely proud of Barney. At 23, he made that journey. But remember, I think it's important, if you say you're going to do something, you should do it. So my hip wore out. I've got a brand new hip. It's 8 weeks old. And at the end of next year, I'm going back to finish those last bloody 300 miles to the South Pole, because we said we were going to do it. And this time, our clothing and a lot of our equipment is going to be made from CO2 to inspire people. Thank you all.
So Rob and Barney, quickly before you adjourn, you're from, let's just say it, Rob, we're from different generations here, yeah? The 2 of you. 3 words to express how you feel about the future, 3 words or less, hyphens are acceptable. Just 3 words to express how you each feel about the future, hyphens are acceptable. Barney.
Oxymoronic, curious, and fearful.
Great. Robert.
Hopeful, hard, possible.
My 3 words, I can't wait. Thanks to Rob and Barney.